Welcome. This is Learn to Do with Peter for April 25th, 2024. And let me get a HackMD started here. Did I say the 24th? I meant the 25th. Let me note real quick, kind of a news thing. It's funny, I want to type partyrocks.aws, but I'm not going to. We were just talking about it before the recording. Some of us, a session ago, 2 sessions ago, some of us need to do some like 1 minute, 2 minute videos, shorts, doing demonstrations and stuff. RJ is out way ahead of us doing HTML screen slidecasts and GIFs and stuff. We talked about a place to talk about video, and it turns out John's Video with John, one of the guilds, the idea of it originally was to be a place for Gen AI video. But I've checked with John and he's totally cool with us coming over and saying, dude, I actually have a non-AI question. Should I use CapCut? Should I use Premiere? Should I use Resolve? DaVinci Resolve. Turns out DaVinci Resolve actually, CapCut and DaVinci Resolve are different classes of things. Anyway, those kinds of questions, what's the best tool for captioning videos? Even stuff, I think, I said we had post-production questions, but maybe we have production questions too, like lighting or Danielle and Cindy and I were setting up a co-accountability group. Hey, I'll do it if you make sure. I'll make sure you do it if you make sure I do it. So we haven't been too harsh with each other yet, but I'm expecting Cindy and Danielle to get up on my grill and say, dude, where's my videos? And then I have a bunch of cool Jenkifiers to say, well, I've been doing Jenkifiers instead. And I think they'll go, oh, that's so cool. Anyway, we'll see. Video discussion. Go to video with John. John and I are probably going to set up a co-session, like a dual guild, barn raising, hoedown thing. So look for that. Any other news that is top of mind for people? I know Llama 3 is big. The thing, I haven't got excited about Llama 3 because it doesn't do anything different than GPT-4. So, I mean, it's really cool, and it's cool that they're doing cool stuff with it, and it's cool that you can make it local and things like that. So I definitely want to use it, and especially play with it when we get our local LLMs going. But otherwise, it's not new. Cool. So Danielle.
Okay, so I haven't done the whole doing my Mad Lib explanation thing yet,
Dude,
but
you're
I did
behind on
do.
videos? Oh my gosh, I can't believe
No,
it.
I didn't do the video yet, but I did do a video.
Nice.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I did do that.
Okay.
So I did do
Okay.
a TikTok thing that was a huge thing because I did not enjoy that at all. So that now I have to do the Mad Lib tutorial. So I want to figure out how to do that little like put yourself in a circle thing and then also share your screen at the same time to be able to, you know what I mean? How people do that.
I do. Yep.
I want to do that when I
Yep.
do share, when I do it. So I don't know how to do that. Maybe the
Um,
video guild would be able to teach me that, or else ChatGPT can.
let's invade John's guild and say, hey John, I want to do this, or hey John and Pete, I want to do this. And John and I should like cover that. John should cover it, or I should cover it, or John and I should cover it probably next week. I have to say, so my hack on that, I still am so pleased with myself because I do these things, and there's going to be a little picture of me somewhere, right? I'm like, I've got this totally covered. And then you go over and you want to make a vertical video, you know, and you can either get a tiny bit of the web browser, or you can get Pete and the edge of the web browser, but you can't get both. And yeah, I know another answer. I, I'm not sure you're gonna like this. I don't like this. Um, Another answer is OBS.
Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah, okay. So I hate
I
OBS too.
downloaded it and then I totally deleted it off. That's what I deleted off my computer yesterday. I hated it so much because I wasn't it interfered with like even being able to join a Google Meet yesterday. And so
Yeah,
because of like it was
yeah,
interfering with like my audio, and I was like, forget this. So I was like
yeah.
wiped it.
Um, the other tools are going to be kind of a little bit easier, but you're still gonna. I mean, it's still a thing, you know. Um, OBS is short for Open Broadcast Studio. It's super awesome software. It does a lot. It's like a broadcast studio on your computer. But the thing is, you kind of don't want a broadcast studio running on the computer that you're also doing your stuff on. And getting those two things running at the same time is a challenge. Even for me, I've played around with OBS, and it's a challenge. But I did watch the YouTube tutorial where somebody says, "Oh, just set up a new preset or whatever, and make vertical video, and then like slide everything around, turn on your camera, slide that over, turn on your screen, slide that over, scale it." So you can do it with OBS, and actually it comes out really nice if you have the patience to play with OBS.
I've used
Um,
OBS for recording screens and it comes in handy. Like
mhm.
if somebody's broadcasting something like on TikTok or whatever, I mean, you could basically set it up so that it would record it so you can watch it later.
It's good for screen recording. I guess, actually, yeah, it's good for screen recording. It's good for streaming. You can also stream, like I'm doing now. You can, and actually, I've kind of done this where instead of the video that goes out from my camera, it would be I could have my screen as the background and things like that. And you can do all kinds of stuff with OBS. It's really nice. It's a little complicated, and a little hard. And it's hard managing a bunch of multiplexing video and audio stuff on your computer when you've already got other stuff doing that. It's not trivial. Okay, so I was going here with I was going to find where I should tell you about. Well, so one of the things we could do is talk about new Jenkifiers. I'm actually pretty excited about LexiConstructor. I don't know who's checked it out yet, but it's actually pretty cool, and I would like to talk about it. The way I put it together as well. There's the Jenkifier bedification project, which we can talk about. I'm excited to talk about it, but I don't have to talk about it. And then there's the thing that RJ and I were talking about. I'm going to try to find it in here. RJ, is that a comment on? It's on a comment on this, right?
It was for the invitation. Yeah. What
So
particularly were you talking about? Oh, all that
see,
stuff. Okay.
RJ did a cool thing here. He's like, I know, we'll queue up the conversation beforehand. And then we actually did have some conversation. Um, if I had set up this page beforehand, and I haven't even shared it yet, if I had set this page up beforehand, RJ could have put it on here instead, or in both places.
And I would have too.
Yeah, yeah. Cutting with all ends, and then I had a few things I said here.
Yeah, I just made another app today for doing something I've been meaning to try to figure out for years. And I did it all like in a couple of hours with very little work on my part, actually.
Yeah.
Claude did all the work. But it's a really cool app. I really like it. I'm going to be using it every day.
I've got a few things like that, yeah, that I've built with. Okay, so let me put this back up into the topics list, and then let me make checkboxes. So I'm about to ask people like what they want to talk about or what they don't want to talk about. Maybe, I don't know. But I know that means everybody has to go off mute. So should we make a plan of getting through this, or should we just kind of cover it as we go and we'll see what happens? Does anybody want to especially make sure that we like, so coding with LLMs, we're going to talk about that for a while, I think. Not like, but 20 or 30 minutes, we could probably talk about this. When the Jenkifier approach makes sense, you know, when you use JavaScript, when you use Python, that kind of stuff. That kind of goes along a little bit with the Betterification project, because I guess coding with Jenkifiers are coding with LLMs. It's just a real simple version of it. And even LexiConstructor is a little bit of an advanced Jenkifier that I could talk about why it's put together. I put checkboxes so we could check that one off. I'm still really interested to talk about local LLMs, except I haven't done my homework, which is kind of a good thing and a bad thing. I haven't run any of the managers on my computer, but that might be a good thing, because then you can see me stumbling through how to install them and get them set up and things like that. So I'm interested in talking about that too. And then I'm going to put Midjourney here because I've been doing a ton of Midjourney stuff with LexiConstructor, and there's good and bad things to talk about there. Does anybody have any preferences of please don't talk about this so much, or let's talk about that all the time, or anything like that? Or just kind of good to go with the flow?
Well, I was hoping I could demo really quickly the two
Yes.
apps that I made, because I think it would be interesting for people to see what else they can do really easily, like with Claude to make code, besides just, you know, switching prompts around.
Yep.
You know, I'm like talking like things that are like practical for everyday use, you know, besides chat image generation stuff.
Yep.
I would like to, if you're going to talk about the use of LLMs to write code, I'd love to know what they might be good for and what they might come up short on. I have a very specific use case in mind, and I can just ask the LLM, but I kind of don't trust, because they just tell me I can do anything. And I'm not so sure that I can accomplish what I would like to do. So I'd like to just know what your take is, or what others' take is, on what they're good at and what they're not good at.
Okay. That sounds great, and that's definitely something to cover. So let's kind of just go for it. Maybe RJ, do you want to do show and tell first?
Yeah, okay. So let me hold on. I want sorry. I want
And
to
did I didn't get the HackMD link in the chat?
yeah,
I did, yeah.
I just want to, while you're giving out the HackMD link, I just want to open up another thing I want to demo really quick. So just give me a minute. It's not this one.
I got myself banned for 3 minutes on Midjourney today. And it was scary, I have to tell you, because it pops up so the story is I'm using LexiConstructor, which uses random words and stuff like that. And I've already cut a bunch of words, not a bunch, but like 10 or 20 words out of the corpus, because they come up and they're not like I didn't start with a list that had swears, but there are a few words that if it comes up out of context, it's like, yeah, that's not a thing that you put in an image prompt. So I got those out, but I'm bumbling along. I'm like testing it a lot. So I'm doing lots of Midjourney generation, and then it says, you got to, our AI moderator thinks this is a bad prompt. We're not going to let you do it. So this happened before. The last time this happened on a call, we figured out what the word was. It's a common 4-letter word, and you go, yeah, that's fair. If I had known that was in the prompt, I wouldn't have put it in. So that happened to me yesterday, and so I'm cheeky, right? I said, I know what that one is, and I just changed one letter, and it's good to go. So I did the same thing today. I got a prompt up, and it gives me the warning, and I'm like, okay, I'll bet I want to find out what the word is. It's not the word that was from yesterday. So I went in and changed one letter in a word that I thought it was, and I hit enter again, and it's like, bam, dude, your account is under manual review, and you're like blocked until blah 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 1701 whatever, right? And
Wow.
it's a GMT time, but it doesn't say that. So it seemed like it was going to be hours and hours and past the time of the call, right? This call. So I'm like, and my heart's racing, and like I'm getting palpitations and stuff like that. So then I finally figured out, I calmed down and I looked at the time. It's a 3-minute ban. And then I looked, it does say your account is under manual review. So I copied manual review and went over to Discord, and there's a bunch of people that are going, why am I under manual review? And it's like, no big deal. It's a 3-minute ban, and it just like to stop and make you think, and not to try it twice. So the moral of the story is, don't try hacking your prompt to make it fit the AI moderator. Just like drop that prompt, burn it, and go on to the next one. And I also found out that right now, because the election is coming up, if you try to do anything with Trump or Biden or things like that, that you get one of those really quick, and people are like, "What? I was just trying to make a funny meme thing or something like that, with either Biden or Trump," and you get the ban really quick. So
All right, I'm ready to share if you guys are ready.
let's go for it. Go for it, RJ.
Okay. So I'm sharing my screen, and I'm sharing sound too. And I'm
Nice.
going to share, where is it? Oh, this guy. Yeah, this is the screen I want to share it. Okay. Okay, so these are two apps. What's going on? All right, so these are two apps that I wanted to make. The first one, I wanted to sort of use, I wanted to sort of make like a slideshow kind of generator, but I wanted to make it with just one file. So like, normally when you make a slideshow, you have, a bunch of slides. And if you make it with pictures, then you have a bunch of pictures you got to put together. Or if you have HTML, I don't know how you do with HTML normally, but I figured, well, there's must be a way to get HTML to have all of the slides I want to present in one HTML file, and just have it show them one at a time, even though they're all in the same file. And I asked Claude if that was doable, and it said, yeah, you could do it. It would just hide the other slides and show them section at a time. So I made it first, and then I figured, okay, well, I can do other things, like I can put in a pause button or a dark mode button. And then I really got an inspiration. I remembered, oh, there's this thing called the Web API API that you can get browsers to talk really easily. You just have to refer to it. So I said, sure, I can do that. And it did all of that. So this was the app that I made with Claude, and it did it like piece by piece. We put it together as I would think of the ideas. And each time it pretty much got it like perfectly right. I got lucky, I guess. And so here it is. And basically it's a slideshow. And what you'll see here is this is like slide 1, which is in section 1. And I have it set up so that it automatically goes from one page to another even though this is all in a really tiny HTML file, the file is like less than 10 kilobytes. And so if I take it off of pause and I also press read aloud, it'll also narrate it.
Make an LLM write custom code you can run in a browser. First, tell an LLM to make an HTML file containing JavaScript to do a task. Example task: user enters text, then JavaScript sorts the words. Next, copy the LLM code using the LLM's copy code button. Now, create and open a text file. Paste code in the .text file. Next, rename the .text file so extension is .html. Now double-click .html file to run the code. See if the code works properly. If no, then ask the LLM to fix it. Example screenshot of using free Claude. Claude, what can I help you with today? User input: make HTML file containing JavaScript to get user input, then sort the words. Example screenshot of HTML code by free Claude. Imagine Claude's HTML code appeared here, copy code button. Example screenshot of running Claude's word sorter HTML code. Claude app says, enter some text below and click the sort words button to sort the words alphabetically. User input: dog, cat, apple, ball. Sort words button. Claude app sorted output: apple, ball, cat, dog. Congratulations! You now can make LLMs write custom code you can run.
So I thought that was really cool that, it would make a slideshow, it would narrate it, it would allow me to put in pause buttons. And one really cool thing I did too was that I wanted it to delay the slide and show it for as long as the text was. So if the text had like 20 words, I wanted to use a word count per minute that people typically read at, and make sure that there was enough time for a person to read that particular slide. And it was able to do all of that stuff. But the read out loud part is the part I really like. And I also had it put in the dark mode. So does anybody have any questions about all that?
I've got a few, but I'll let other people ask first. I'll bet it's actually kind of hard to understand what's going on here.
What do you mean?
Um, it's well, I know what's going on because I've done this kind of thing before. But if you haven't done, if you haven't had the experience of asking ChatGPT to program something, then we're still like on Jankfires, right? Like, ask it a simple thing. So you've gone like a couple levels past that, and I'll bet it's like a little bit hard to hard to draw the line from where we were with Interleaver to Slideshow Maker. But this is really cool, RJ. I wonder if you, so a question I have is, do you, how could you show us the Claude conversation maybe, or at least?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I saved each individual version that I did, and I also saved it all in one big document file, so I could basically I could go through this really quick. I just gotta open it up. Hold
Let
on
me
a second.
let me try to explain. There's enough like levels here. There's a couple levels of things going on, and there's enough levels that it's a little bit tricky for me even to think about like narrating through what's going on. But to try to break it down kind of, RJ said, hey, I've already done the GIF thing where I've got essentially slides. He's doing the GIF slideshows, right? How about if I did that as an HTML page? So each slide is an HTML page instead of a frame in a GIF. So he's like, got that idea in his head. And then he went over to Claude and he said, hey, Claude, let's do this thing. I want HTML pages in kind of a script. I have a script to have each HTML page go. And then I want to do some extra fancy stuff, right? I want to have the pause, unpause button. I want to have the dark mode. I want a read it button. So let's talk about the read it button a little bit more with web APIs, but we'll come back to that. So so RJ, what was
Okay.
the Claude?
Well, here's the Claude file. Can you see it okay here? It's
Yeah,
my
yeah,
questions to Claude.
yeah.
Yeah, so basically, first I just asked it. Now, this is like I was just totally riffing. I had this like idea in the back of my mind. I knew that there was this software that you could use on the web that would write interactive stories, and I was thinking about how people on these calls said, "Hey, how can we have like a good summary to remind us of how to do stuff?" So I was sort of thinking along those lines, and I already made my own version using the GIF file, to show them step by step. But I thought, well, now how can I do it with code instead as HTML?
So let
So
me pause you
I
right there real quick.
asked it how to make like yeah, yeah.
Um, so you see how this is kind of similar to a Jenkifier, right? It's like, how can I take a string and add jungle words or frog words or cat words to it, right? So RJ kind of asked the same thing to Claude. I want to do something like something kind of straightforward, and you don't know exactly how to explain it to the LM, but you can kind of just explain it however it makes sense, and then it says. And then he says here an interactive story. The slideshow that he showed us, what happened to be an interactive story about making it's a snake eating its tail thing. The story is actually about how to make one of these slideshow things, or how to code with Claude. So that story could have been, one day a frog went to, the store and bought some groceries or whatever, right? It could have been that too. So, okay, thanks, RJ.
Well, in my case, it was more generic. I was just saying, hey, is this possible? And it said, yeah, we can create like a story where all of the different slides are in one single HTML file, and it'll just have separate sections. So I said, okay, go ahead and make me one with 2 sections. So it did that. It made me one with a section
Cool.
1 and a section 2, and it gave me the code. And then I thought to myself, okay, that's all I want to know. Can it do it? And let's go through the process. I didn't actually ask it to make those particular slides. I just wanted to make the generic structure. And then while it was doing that, I was on the side thinking, all right, I'll fill in the slide sections later once I figure out if it'll work. So it made the slide, the HTML code, and it was a tiny amount of code. And I checked to see if it worked. It worked okay. It showed slide 1, it showed slide 2, and it had some navigation buttons and so on. So then what I did was
And
I said,
RJ, can
oh,
I ask,
yeah,
was that all on
sure.
one, that was all on one page, right? And it auto scrolled or something to show the different sections? That was what you're,
No, it's not. No, that first example, and I could show it if you want to see it. The first example basically was, well, I'll just show it. It's easier to just show it. Hold on a second. Let me go to the old versions. All right, if I go to old version and I pick like version 1, well, let's see. I don't know. I can't remember. All right, I think this might be it. Oh no, that's a more advanced one. Sorry. Well, basically, what it did was it made a very simple version. It had a link at the top for section 1, it had a link at the top for section 2, and it had a stop and go button, basically. So
Gotcha.
I figured, okay, well, let me just build on that and build on that. So that's what I did. I built on that, and then I asked it for some other stuff. Let me see, I have to go down to the next section here. So for each section, so now then I said, okay, please add a timer so that after 5 seconds, it'll automatically show the next section. So it's not scrolling up and down.
Yeah, it's just showing the section.
Always
Yeah.
from the very beginning, always just showed one slide at a time, which in the HTML file, they call them sections.
Yep.
So it's a tiny HTML file with all the slides in different sections, but it only displays it sections at a time. And I figured, well, let's do it automatically instead of having a forward and back button. Let's do it automatic. So I started to add all of these different features. At first it was manual, you had to press the advanced button. Then I said, okay, do it for 5 seconds each slide automatically. And then I thought, well, I'm thinking ahead, right? I'm thinking, well, I'm going to make some with a large amount of text. Each
Do you want to scroll down the
slide.
you want to scroll down your doc real quick
Yeah.
and kind of just show us, here's where I.
Okay, yeah. So in this section here, well, here's where it's showing how to
Probably not in real
work.
big gore details.
So here's another section. Yeah. So now I said, okay, well, please add a pause button. This is another version. I said I wanted a pause button. So it put in a pause button for me. And now I'll scroll down to the next part. And now I said, please put a back button. What if the person's watching the tutorial? I'm thinking of like Cindy. Remember Cindy said, oh, she wants to have a very quick review of how to do stuff that we covered on the meeting. Well, I did that with the GIF, but you can't go back in the GIF. You have to wait till it cycles around. So I figured, well, this will be a more advanced version. We're putting in a forward button. Let's put in a back button too, so it can go back in the slide. So we did that. The back button worked okay. So then what I did was I said, please modify the code so that while it's automatically going from one slide to the next, it allows a duration of 2.5 seconds per word, because I did the calculation of what a person, an average reader reads words per minute. I did the math and I figured, okay, let's do it. And then it did that. And then I figured, okay, well, let's get even fancier, because some people may read slowly, some people may read fast. So I'm still riffing here with Claude, and Claude was like really good. It's like, oh, you want that? Yes, I will do that for you. Bang, it did it. And I got lucky. Each time it worked perfectly the first time. But so then I said, well, make some other buttons. Make another button for people who read slow, make a button for people who read fast and medium. So it did that. And but eventually I decided yeah.
I'm going to skip you kind of to the end. I think so. We probably don't need to go through each iteration, but the overall story here is that you started in a simple place and then you just kept iterating. You kept going, yeah, I could add this one more thing. I could add this one more thing. And Claude kept up with you. So both of you are working kind of like a team, and you were moving forward through this. So you got to a complicated place, but none of the steps in themselves were very complicated, which is really cool. Is that right?
Well, some of them were a little bit. There's a caveat there. So once you get into some crazy stuff, like once you start to ask it to count how many words are in each slide, well, that text also includes HTML code. And I said, well, I don't want it to count the HTML code as part of the text, because then it's going to be, if I put in a lines feed or something like that, it's going to start to add that up and the slide's going to go for too long, because because there's not really that many words. A lot of that text is HTML. So I got it to, and it said, sure, I could eliminate the HTML, no problem. Then when I got it to do the I also figured, well, let me add in some emojis. That would make it cool because instead of adding a picture file, which is huge, I can add an emoji, which is a tiny, it's just a character, but it looks like a picture. But then the problem is later on, once I got it to use this speech, it started to speak the emoji like character pointing left, face point. And I didn't want it to do that. So that got a little complicated because I had to say, could you possibly make it not do the narration of what the emoji looks like? And it said, oh yeah, I can do that. And it did it all by itself, really smart. What it did was it said, it picked out, not all emojis, but it picked out most emojis, put it into a regular expression, and then had it yank those out from the text using that regex, regular expression way of doing it with code.
Let me
And I'm
let
like,
me
whoa, this is like, yeah.
let me ask you. So it got complicated, but you didn't let that overwhelm you, and you just kind of like kept going step by step, and then you get to a place where to do one step, which you thought was going to be simple, you had to do more steps. But so how did you feel? How did you not freak out at that point? How did you go, this is too complicated?
Oh, I
I'm never
loved
gonna
it
get.
because I loved it because step by step it was like we're really riffing here. I'm like in
Yeah,
the
in the
zone, as
groove.
they
Yeah.
say. I'm functioning at my maximum capacity. It's not too hard. It's not too easy. And so it was really, really, that was the really cool part about it. And then eventually what I decided was I didn't want to have the slow, medium, fast buttons because they cluttered up the screen. And I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. So I just made it go at the generic slow speed. And I figured, well, if people want to go faster, they can click the next button instead and they can go as fast as they want. And the reading worked okay. Oh, one thing that really bugged me is the web API, the speech web API would pronounce JavaScript incorrectly. So I put in I asked it, how can we pronounce JavaScript, the word JavaScript, as two words instead of JavaScript, which is sort of how it was pronouncing it. So it told me how to do that, and we stuck that code in. So it was really fun. So I figured I'm on a roll now. So what I wanted to do was I made another app, which can you see this app right here? I
Yes.
made this one today.
Yes.
All right. So basically, this has been an ongoing problem I've had. I've tried timers, I've tried all kinds of things. I sit for way too long because I get too involved in what I'm doing. So I wanted to make a cool little app that would give me a histogram sort of like how much I've been sitting and how much I've been up and about. And I went through the same exact process. This was a little bit trickier because it was making some errors in the code. But basically, I said, make me a timer for when the user's sitting and when the user's not sitting. So it did that, and it basically just made a timer. And then I said, okay, now put in a row for each instance of when they hit the sitting and not sitting button. And so it shows the time so we can add it up later and plot it. So it did that. And then I thought to myself, well, let's keep this nice and simple and put in some sort of a bar chart. And I figured, well, the easiest way for it to make a bar chart is to put in a character like an equal sign. So first I had to put in like an equal sign for the bar. But then I thought, well, in my next iteration, I figured, well, let me have it put in an emoji. Instead, I'm really going emoji crazy because they say so much and they're so easy to implement and they're so fun to use and look at. So I figured, put in a chair emoji character for every minute that the person's user's been sitting, and putting a running man emoji whenever the person's not sitting and they're up and about and they're moving around. And it did that. And I said, okay, well, now put it in for every row. And it did that. And then I said, okay, well, now put it in along with the timer too, so the person can see how much their current amount of time. So you can see there now there's 27 Running Man because I've been sitting for 27 minutes. And as soon as it hits 28 minutes, it's going to bang, it added in another emoji. So now this shows that I'm not sitting, but because I'm out of sequence here, I forgot to hit the sitting button. But if I had hit the sitting button, it would have probably showed that I've been showed chair icons instead. So looking at this, I'm going to try doing this now every day. I'm going to be using this, and I'm also going to probably say, hey, Claude, put in a little beeper timer too. Like if I've been sitting for 10 minutes, put in a beeper, and this way I'll go look. I'll see, well, what's my history been for the last hour? Have I been sitting like way too much for the last hour? If I have, then I'll probably get up. If I got something urgent to do and I haven't been sitting a lot for the last hour, maybe I figure, okay, we'll just, let it go a little longer and then I'll get up in maybe 5 minutes. So anyway, this app I made not as easily because it had a hard time with doing some of the stuff, but it basically, all I had to do was tell it what it did wrong and it would try to make the correction. And sometimes it wouldn't get it right the first time, but usually the second or third time, it eventually would get it right. So I'm overall very impressed with Claude. It's really good considering it doesn't actually run the code after it makes it. It relies on me to run the code to see what's going wrong because it cannot run code. Anyway, that's the end of my story. Any
Awesome,
questions?
RJ. Any questions?
And by the way, this code, if anybody wanted to riff on it, I could give them the code. They could pump it into Claude and make up their own version and say, Claude, I didn't like it that way. Make it this way instead. You know what I mean?
I love it, RJ. Good job.
And this one too,
Um,
by the way, this slideshow one I made generic. So I have a generic version and it has it has 12 different sections in it without any text. So if anybody
nice.
wants to copy it, they can just simply copy the little file. It's only like 10 kilobytes and they could paste in their own text instead of where it says section 1, section 2, section 3. They can paste in their own slide text and they'll instantly have a slideshow that they can run and they can use it for their own purposes. They could use it, for positive affirmations or meditation. You can use it as a meditation kind of, like walk you through a meditation. There's so many applications you can use with speech, web speech AI. You can use it for tutorials. You can use it for flashcards. There's like so that's why I put that question in. What other applications might people want to make? Anyway, sorry for talking so long.
No worries.
I'm
Thank you,
going
RJ.
to end my I'm going to end my screen sharing because I've been talking too much already.
Um, Scott kind of Scott went the same place I did. Scott said in chat, put it on GitHub. The next like stretch thing to maybe think about doing is to start using Git and GitHub. So Git you use to keep track of versions of things, and then GitHub is to share things. Maybe I'll do some sessions on Git and GitHub because I think it's really important, but I know it's not for everybody too.
My problem
Um,
with GitHub is they banned me as being a spammer again. Remember I told you about that before?
Maybe it doesn't have to be GitHub. There's a couple other good places to go. Codeberg is fine, for instance.
Okay.
GitHub is called a Git. It's the generic class of things that GitHub is a Git Forge, and there's a couple other ones. There's GitLab and Codeberg. Those are probably the ones that and for anyway, Codeberg would be great. Scott, we'll get you to use the GitHub account more with the AI 101 wiki, of course. Don't think I forgot. um, uh, cool. So let's pick up from there. And in particular, RJ did a cool thing which he didn't cover in the recount there, which I think is fine because we got enough gory detail, I think, about creating an app with Claude. I had the similar experience. I won't have to go through the whole thing with y'all, but the same thing happened to me with I can't think of the name because I'm trying to think of something else at the same time. LexiConstructor, it was the same thing. You know, what I wanted was something that put together random words. And the first version of this only had one of these and I wanted 10. And getting to that point was kind of the same thing that RJ went through. You know, you like try something, you try another thing, you try another thing. And it took me a long time to kind of get this the way I wanted it, but it was pretty cool. So a thing that RJ didn't cover there was, but it's actually really smart that he put it in, was the web API for speech. So let's talk about web API real quick. There's web API is kind of like the other APIs been talking about, but it's kind of different too. Let me click this link here. Let me move the thumbnails of you all over to my other screen. I had a better version, this is the one with a good list of like all the possible ones you can use. A web API is the name of a thing that's built into your browser, actually. So the idea of these is that you don't have to have an API key. You don't have to call out to a separate service or anything like that. It's literally built into your browser. So when RJ is having his slideshow thing read, he's not like doing anything on the web. It's all still in his browser. So there's a short list of these. This is I asked ChatGPT.
But wait a minute, wait. I think it is actually going to the web though, isn't it?
I think it's not. I think you're using the web speech API.
Oh, sorry. I'm thinking about when it's listening to me. I also tried the listening version.
I didn't know this, but there's also a input. There's it goes both ways locally.
Yeah, I tried the one that listens and does voice to text, and that one definitely is going to the cloud to do the translation from voice to text.
Okay. And you know, a lot of times you do actually, I mean, there's times you want to call out to a web service and times you don't. For what it's worth, RJ, there is a local speech recognition API. So you could get your browser to do it. I don't know how well it's going to work, but it'll probably work okay. So those are pretty fancy ones. The speech ones are pretty fancy. Let's kind of look through this. This is a short list. You saw that long list I was scrolling through. That's on this developer Mozilla thing. Canvas is just something where you can use simple commands to draw like lines and circles and stuff like that. And this is the way that you do very, very simple, like either diagramming or maybe like a game, something like that. So this is like some of the more popular, more common ones. You can get it to play like audio, like simple beeps and boops and stuff like that, buzzes and stuff. You can do that speech thing. You can get your browser to store some information for you. I think there's two of them, IndexedDB and Web Storage API. If RJ wanted to, he could store his sitting and not sitting data in his browser in a place where if he reloads the page, the browser will still be able to find it, things like that. Even if you close your browser and reopen it, it'll still be able to find it. You can look through the history, your browser history. You can interact with local files. You can find out where in the world you are. This is used more for, you know, this doesn't make sense for me to use it for me, but that's something that, like, I guess advertising services use, but there's other reasons you might use it too. Being able to drag and drop stuff onto the web page. So there's all these little like libraries, kind of, you can think of them, that that probably doesn't make sense either. But there's these little add-on things that your browser does natively that you can access through JavaScript. And then when we say you can access through JavaScript, even if you're not a JavaScript programmer, we know that you can go over to ChatGPT or Claude. Now we know about Claude too. You can go to a good enough LLM and say, hey, write me a web page that does this, you know, and this is the kind of stuff that you can play around with. Let me look real quick if there's, it was interesting scrolling through these. Some of these are experimental and some of them are experimental and like deprecated or stuff. But there's all kinds of cool stuff going on here. And the way this works is these are all, when it says API like this, what it means is that unlike car manufacturers or smartphone manufacturers or something like that, you have to buy a special case for an iPhone versus a special case for a Samsung Android versus a Google Android, all that kind of stuff, right? It's different. The APIs, even though you've got Chrome or Opera or whatever the Microsoft one is now, Edge, or Opera or whatever browser you're using, the standards bodies have set it up so that you write JavaScript and do the same things, and the browser makes sure that it works on whatever browser you're using. So that's really cool. So that's a quick thing about web APIs, and it probably didn't make much sense. But any questions about web APIs versus? And it's super confusing that most other APIs you also access them via the web, like the OpenAI API or the Cloud API, or Scott hitting, I forget which one now. Those are hit over the web, so it's super confusing that they call these web APIs. Well, they should really call these web browser APIs or web browser standards or something, but that's what they are.
Yeah, I think they represent something that we could really tap into to be able to make our own apps for our own personal use, in particular, that are supercharged, like, like adding that ability to add the narration so simply and easily. It's like, whoa, that supercharged my app like instantly.
Yep. Yes, I agree. I think your synth voice is a little bit better than mine on my browser. I'm actually not a fan of the synth voices, but on the other hand, it's got a lot of utility, and I get that.
Well, you can add other voices, I think, usually.
If you hit a web one, and probably even a local one too, you're probably right.
And that was just a generic voice, by the way. I could have put in code that would have allowed me to pick the voice, but I didn't want to overcomplicate the app.
Yeah. Yet maybe you'll get to that.
Well, I did do an experiment, and I realized that it just made the whole process too time consuming to have to click on a button and to pick which voice was being used. It was just way too complicated, and I don't mind the generic voice.
Yeah, I totally get that. Let's talk about this a little bit. So there's a choice of if you're using an LLM to do programming, which is kind of what we're talking about doing. You can use it to make JavaScript in a web page, or you can use it to make Python apps, or you can use it to do a bunch of different things, right? So the really cool thing about JavaScript in an HTML page. And the reason RJ picked it for his apps and the reason I picked it for Jankifiers is because it's super easy to run. You just load it as a web page and then it's running basically. It's also super easy to share it. RJ could give those files to anybody else, or Jankifiers, we can share them on the web or send them an email or whatever. And you know that the person getting it, as long as they've got a web browser, they don't even really have to know that they're running an app. You know, that you just tell them click on this and it, poof, it's running. So, you know, then you can be running something like LexiConstructor or the RJ's slideshow. So there's a lot of utility to doing that. I feel like for some things, there's kind of, I guess there's maybe some like spectrums or something like that. You know, do you want it to be easy to code, or is it okay if it's a little bit harder to code? Do you want it to be easy to run anywhere, or do you want more control over the screen than an HTML page has? Things like that. How fancy do you need the storage, the database for it to be? And so depending on the answers to those, you might write HTML and JavaScript, you might write Python, you might write other things too. I think maybe it's enough to talk about that. You might think about that, and then, you know, that would be a good thing to ask an LLM probably. It's probably a good thing also to ask on the on Mighty Network someplace. You know, hey, I wanted to. So let me show you some of the apps I've built for in Python actually with LLMs. And what I'm going to do is just go to the place where I keep all my Python apps and kind of read off. So this is something that calculates aspect ratio math. It does aspect ratio math because I need that for Midjourney. And these are like almost all Python. I've got a script that takes a Netscape bookmark file and turns it to a CSV. This is an older version of LexiConstructor that's written in Python. This is a thing that moves Midjourney files of some kind, some way. I don't know, I needed something fancy. This is a different thing. This takes an image in one aspect ratio and pads it to be another aspect ratio. I'm starting to print some of my Midjourney pictures off at a printer, and I wanted, you know, I do different aspect ratios kind of natively. I always playing around with aspect ratios, and then you want to print it at 8:10 or 4:6 or whatever. So I've got a bunch of things. I guess let me do a quick show and tell here with that. I think I can
Can
do.
I ask on this side while you're opening it, why you just didn't do that like in an Excel spreadsheet or something?
So I've got two aspect ratio, one that does math. I guess I didn't want to do that. It kind of worked. This one, you know, it's actually, it reads the image itself. So I say, hey, what's the aspect ratio of this image? So I can't do that with Excel very easily. And then I got it to do reduced fractions and then also a decimal. And then, you know, actually I kept making it better. So it got to the point where, you know, the funny thing is I wrote this one, I got ChatGPT to write it. Let me show you something weird or crazy or something like that on AI Salon, actually. I literally wrote this on AI Salon because when you do, let me edit this maybe. This is kind of scary, editing a live session. They've got this weird, stupid aspect ratio here for these things, and they tell you what it is, thank goodness. 21:9, which reduces to 7:3. But then they've got in some cases, the bottom quarter of the image will be covered by event information. Almost all the time, they have a thing that blocks off this. And so the other image I've got here, the next event, it was generated. I don't know. There's a long story behind this image, but anyway, you can see where it gets darker here and then darker again. This is where I've padded it. This is out painting in Photoshop. Actually, the images in Midjourney, but right now there's more of this image under here, under this banner thing. So they tell you, by the way, we're going to cover up a quarter of it sometimes. So anyway, I had this image and I padded it a couple times in different ways. And at some point it was like, how much do I have to pad it to get this blah, blah, blah. And so, I could have done, RJ, you're probably right. I could have done this in Excel. I'm not very good at Excel. And I'm a lot better at telling ChatGPT to write code. So that's why I did it. But this also looks at an image and tells the aspect ratio for it. This other one, it takes an image, and let me do this one instead. So I want to print these, right? But they're different aspect ratios. So so I wrote that code to put white borders on the edges so that it prints. So now if you print this 11:14, it's going to come out, it comes out right. It's not going to get cropped by their auto cropper or anything like that. The print shop's auto cropper. And there's another fancy thing. The first version of this, it padded on one direction, but I set it up so it pads the least. It knows how to pad either the top and bottom or the left and right, depending on what shape the image is. So
Well, it's funny you're doing this because I'm doing the same thing, except really
think so?
simply manually. Yeah, because on Mighty Networks, like you said, they'll chop part of the image. And depending on whether you're making a comment or writing an article or a post, it'll chop it in different ways. So I've had to pad my images. Yeah. But
So Scott's question, did you put that up on GitHub? I haven't. Some of these are actually on GitHub, some of them aren't. Anyway, so I feel there is a it's easier for me to code and run Python usually than to code HTML. Interestingly enough, JavaScript. JavaScript is easy to code, and the HTML is easy to run. But I still end up going to Python. But for things, this is a good example of something where it's like, yeah, you've got an image. I was going to say this is a good example of maybe you want to do this in Python, I guess. If you have an image on your hard drive that you want either JavaScript or Python to read and then spit out another image with padding like these. I feel like Python is going to be a little bit easier than that, easier to do that with in the web browser. I mentioned it real quick, but there's a whole thing where web browsers aren't supposed to muck with your files because that's a safety problem. You don't want somebody writing JavaScript, in some other part of the world, and then you load this random web page, and all of a sudden it's trashing all your files. So they've got a lot of like safety stuff built into web browsers to make sure that the web browser can't muck up your files, and so then you've got to fight against that with these different APIs. So this is a case where Python is never going to have that problem, kind of, because you always run Python programs locally. So anyway, these are really good questions, RJ, and Scott had kind of the same question. What can you program with an LLM and what can't you? When do you decide to use JavaScript and when do you decide to use Python? I think those are good questions, and we talked just through them a little bit. RJ was saying, here's what I had to do to kind of get Claude to do the right thing. I had the same thing with Lexi Constructor. And I had an interesting problem where it's the observation I had about working with ChatGPT to make Lexicon Constructor better, to add this thing where it did 10 of these. If you notice, I've got 10 different gray sections here. Each of these has what I call sentences inside them. There's 2 or 3 quote unquote sentences. They have like some punctuation and then they have a period or a question mark. So just explaining it, I want 10 of blah. I had to come up with this, way of calling these sets or something like these sets of sentences, because the first try it had, it made 10 sets of like 10 sentences at a time instead of 10 sets at a time. Adding this scramble the first 25 characters was a kind of a pain. It got confused. It's the more you chat with it, the more kind of possibility it has to get confused. And just like RJ was saying, sometimes you have to back up a little bit and explain it more carefully or break it down into more steps or things like that. So kind of the general rule is you can do a lot of coding with the LLMs, but the more complicated, the more you add stuff to it, the more you're going to have to like interact with the LLM and get some like break things down more and more. I guess that's kind of the rule
Peter,
of
you
thumb.
use like a paid version. I'm using a free version of Claude, and I found after going through maybe 6 or 7 different versions of of prototyping, it would eventually start chopping off, truncating its output. And it seems like I was running into some sort of a context window or
Yeah.
chat length, it's total chat length, conversation length barrier, because it would say, oh, your chat conversation's too long. You have to start
Yep.
a new conversation.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. I think so. A thing that we should do at some point is come back to LLM Studio or Yan, whatever it's called, or GPT for all, or I think you can also use Olama with a front end. So maybe that's a fourth one that we'll kind of add to this list. The thing for both of us to do, RJ, is to play around with different models. So maybe we want to use Claude, maybe we want to use Llama, maybe we want to use 8B or 70B. There's some of these models are tuned specifically for coding rather than general chat, right? So we would probably be better off using a coding model instead of one of the general chat models. So that's a thing that we should like dig into if the more we do. So here you go. Here's a coding model, right? And I think the coding models they can be a lot smaller because they don't have to know like everything on the web. They just know how to know lots of code, and they probably are better in some ways.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, exactly. So I had high hopes for talking about coding with LLMs. We talked through it. I don't know that I feel like we made a lot of progress. We talked about a lot of stuff, I guess. So now we can go to the next level of that. We could dig into a part of that, or we could talk about Genkifier bedification, kind of maybe go back a little bit from where we got to coding. RJ and I are off into coding, coding Wonderland, doing all kinds of stuff. Maybe that's what we want to do. Maybe we want to do more of that. Maybe we want to step back a little bit and do something simpler, like just how do we work with it, Genkifiers. What do we think, folks? How are we doing?
It probably depends on how comfortable people feel with coding in general. Like I've had experience coding in the past. So like I do my stuff on Notepad++, and I can see the color coding of the different syntax. And so I know what's going on. But if people haven't done coding, I've done HTML, I've done JavaScript for bookmarklets for years. So I've actually made a
Yep.
a web scraper that I found adapted from somebody's code. But if people are not comfortable with the, that kind of level of understanding the code, maybe they just want to do something simple, they can still do it, but maybe they just need to mention what they're trying to do.
That's one of the cool things that we kind of, I started the idea of Jankifiers actually started with Python code, right? And then I was looking for a way to run it easier, which is how we ended up with that single HTML file. It's really cool that you don't have to know anything about coding and you can just tell the bot to do something and it does it, so that's really cool. Scott, did we come near your question? Did we kind of like give you part of an answer? Do you have more of a question?
So I just have a very specific use case, and I'm curious what they are better at and what they're not better at. The fact that you mentioned that there are LLMs that are sort of code-based LLMs or tuned to code is interesting. I didn't know that, so I'll dig a little bit more into that. And what I'm looking at, I think, is likely quite complex, and I'm just curious how, like, how far you can take these things.
Can you tell us what it is? Tell us what it is you want to do.
Yeah, I want a reservation system. I want an online reservation system. I don't want to pay the obscene prices for the online reservation systems that exist commercially. And I think that a year ago or 2 years ago, you kind of had to. I'm not so sure that I have to now, but I don't know enough about it.
Who are the users of the reservation system, if I may ask?
An RV park.
So you can kind of hold their hand. It doesn't have to look super pretty. You can train them on how to use it and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. I mean the person, it's me.
I
would be training me.
Oh, well, even better. Then you probably won't give yourself too hard of a time if it doesn't look great. Yeah, yeah, you can do that with an LLM. And it's the same approach that RJ's got, basically. It's you keep breaking things down, you keep going,
Yeah.
I think for something like that, there's a system, thinking of an agent-based system that does something similar, but it's not reservation systems coding. Probably what you want to do is, and you can like use ChatGPT the whole way through, right? But it's like you start off probably with, hey, I want to make a reservation system, right? Interview me and ask me, what do I need to know? Tell me about, how I want to develop the HTML front end or whatever, that's actually the wrong, you wouldn't want an HTML front end. You can actually, so right there, what kind of architecture would I use? Do I need a server? Can I get away with not using a server? That kind of stuff. You just start asking it those questions. You start off with architectural questions. How am I going to build this thing? What do I need to know to build this thing? And what you're looking to do is to make a plan that then you can take and drive the LLM into parts of the plan, right? So it's gonna, at some point, it can only keep a few things in its mind at one time, is the overall story. I finally remembered the agent thing I'm thinking of. It's for writing a book. So and we looked at it real quick recently. So if you're writing a book, the current crop of LLMs is not going to have the attention span or the depth of thought to keep in mind the whole thing, but it's conceptually pretty simple, right? You say, hey, LLM, I want to write a science fiction story about space aliens and time travel. Sketch out the arc of the story for me. So that's like the architecture for your reservation system, right? The overall architecture. Now let's talk about, what are the chapters that would go and fit into that arc? What are the different components of the reservation system? What will I need in the reservation system? It'll say things like you need a user interface, you'll need a place to store the data. Depending on how you run it, you'll need you'll need a computer to run it on, or you're running it on your own computer or whatever. So that's kind of like the chapter levels. And then you go into each thing, right? How are we going to make the database layer, the storage layer? How are we going to make the UI? How are we going to do this? So you just keep breaking it down into smaller pieces. And you're the person keeping track of that whole thing, what the whole novel is, and all the little parts of it. But all the little parts and the whole thing, you can ask ChatGPT to sketch it, or your LLM to sketch it out for you, right? And you just keep putting it together in smaller and smaller pieces. So that's the approach.
Understood. And I've used that same basic approach many times with LLMs. And the challenge, I think this is a bigger project than anything that I've taken on. And the challenge that I've run into with LLMs is every time I ask them, can you help me with this? They're like, hell yeah, you got this. And then we'll get to a point and we'll, butt up against a challenge that we can't seem to figure out. And it'll say, well, maybe you need a team of coders. And I'm like, what do I really? And they're like, nah, we got this. And then, so I'll start the next day and we'll do it again. And I've had success. We've gotten to a reasonable end product with these little things I've done before, but they don't seem as daunting. And so I guess my question is just like,
So,
what do we understand about how far can these things go? Can a non-coder make a commercial equivalent product? I'm not looking to sell this, but something that would be equivalent to what I could buy commercially. Maybe it wouldn't look quite as pretty. That's fine. But can we, do they have the capacity to go into really deep, high-end coding, or are they really only good at taking a newbie or a non-coder and letting them do something kind of novel? I mean, novelty to me, everything here is novel because I don't do this shit. But to a person, I have friends who have been coding since high school, so 30 something years in the business, and they just snicker like, that's so easy. And I'm like, yeah, I get it.
so the tool you'll need, the tool you need is that component-based approach, hierarchical component-based approach. So if you just apply that, you can make your reservation system. So the thing that I think the gap that you've got right now, if you ask it to help you, it'll try to keep a couple levels in mind, and at some point it goes, I'm too confused. I'm going to say, I'm going to suggest he uses a team of coders. You don't need a team of coders, but you do need to break up the tasks into LLM-sized chunks, basically. And the way that you do that is with like components and hierarchy. I think I'm repeating myself, so I think I don't know how to explain it more simply, but.
Fair enough. One last question. I just got notification that ChatGPT has now got memory available to me. Do you think that will be beneficial in getting to an end product? The fact that it can now remember potentially back further?
Not for a while. I mean, it'll help a little bit, but it might actually hurt more than it helps for a while. I'm super jealous. The thing its memory is not going to be as good as your memory, and it's
That's bad.
Well,
my memory's awful.
Well, when I say your memory, you've probably got a whiteboard or a sheet of paper or something like that, right? You don't want to keep it in your head. So let me go back over the component and hierarchy thing a little bit more. So the first question you ask is something like, what are some architectures I could use for blah, right? And you actually have that discussion for a while, and you talk about different architectures and have it explain, what the difference between this and that is, or, now let's take this architecture or that architecture, maybe do both. Let's take this architecture and talk a little bit more at depth, dig into this a little bit more, explain the hierarchy of it to me. Um, and then you start sketching your solution out on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard or a lots of pieces of paper, but you keep asking it like questions that kind of go horizontally and then vertically, so across the components at a certain level, and then into each component. And that's the way you go through it. And as you do that, you're either conceptually in your head, or probably I would do it on paper or whiteboard. You're building this, system diagram basically. So ask it, there's a whole body of knowledge about how coding works, and this is the way coders and infrastructure people, hardware people, and stuff like that. All of that stuff is like done out in gory detail. So you can ask it, and then you can go read a Wikipedia page. Probably that's another thing to do, is to ask it for some approaches and then read about them in a place where that it's fact checked, or it's written by, it's an article rather than an LLM making stuff up. And go back and forth that way. That's actually another trick to use. As it talks about componentization or hierarchy or things like that, what you kind of need to do. So the good news is, well, the bad news is, I'll give you the bad news first. The bad news is you're talking about system analysis, right? You need to be a system analyst. So you're going to put on your like consultant hat and come in and interview your customer yourself and say, hey, customer, what do you need this thing to do? What blah, 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 right? That's system analysis. And people get paid lots of money to do that kind of stuff. The good news, so that's the bad news. You have to do that because you're talking about a big system. You're not talking about, Jenkifying a prompt. The good news is ChatGPT can help you at any depth there, no matter what, basically. So at there's a technically accurate answer to your question, which is when would it get out of the depth, but it's past commercial level stuff, I think, kind of, or it's at the level of, build Amazon. I want to build Amazon. I think you could actually build Amazon or build Google with ChatGPT, but it would take 1,000,000 years or something like that. So, or 100,000 people or 1,000,000 people asking ChatGPT over and over and over. At some point, you get to a scale where the LLM, I guess. So what? A different answer, a different way to say the answer that I gave you is you're already scaled past the LLM's capability to do it, but there's an approach to handle that. You just keep breaking it up. And ChatGPT is really good at breaking stuff up. The LLMs are good at doing that. And they're pretty, once you get into a groove with it, like RJ has, you're not in the groove yet. So you've got this thing where, you haven't helped it break stuff up enough, and it gets confused and it barfs on you. When you get into that groove with it, I lost my train of thought a little bit. When you get into the groove with it, I got it back. It's pretty accurate. It can be pretty thoughtful and knowledgeable about the subject because there's a huge corpus of information about how to do software development and system analysis and stuff like that. That training data is really deep and rich, and so it's not going to get confused as much as it would if you were doing, something really obscure. So
Peter, on that, there's probably some tricks to do in terms of prompting, and maybe either system level prompting or that other thing that ChatGPT has, where it will know the context if you can somehow, maybe you have to make a GPT at least for now, to sort of do that, where in the GPT, you
I-
have a whole bunch of files and you have the context and it can refer back to that constantly.
Um, I like where you're going with that, RJ, and I kind of don't think you need to. Um, or maybe I feel like it's using a crutch that you don't need. So you totally could give it a system prompt or make a GPT that says, you know, you are a professional consultant that does system analysis, blah, blah, blah. You don't really need that. I think it's okay to be conversational with it. You do have to, one of you, either the human or the LLM, kind of has to be in that system analyst mindset. And so what I'm recommending to Scott is that he kind of take that on. Um, even to the extent maybe of, you know, hey, ChatGPT, I'm a system analyst. Tell me how I would interview this customer to help them make a reservation system or something like that. So I feel like it's better to the GPT fad. Some of them are super useful, but just like getting it off on a prompt, on a persona prompt, is not as useful as you taking on that persona and having it help you be that person. I think that's my gut feeling. Um, I can go for another 28 minutes. I know we've gone on long and we haven't done much fun stuff. Either we've done a lot of fun, deep, rich stuff, or we've done a lot of hard stuff that didn't seem very productive. It's kind of both.
I was curious if anybody besides Scott is interested in making some sort of an app for their own personal use, probably, like a simple or easy one, um, that maybe they'd like to talk about.
As people think about that, I'll come up with one. I've got one. I've got a fancy, I'm a bit of a gadget freak, not too much of a gadget freak, but I've got a fancy bioelectric toothbrush. It's supposed to like destroy plaque when I put it in my mouth. It's super cool with these electric currents. We'll see, I don't know. Anyway, it's got a replaceable brush head, of course. So there's the battery part and then the bioelectric head part. And you're supposed to change it every 3 months. And there's no way I can keep track of whether it's, I've been using it. I know I've been using it for about a month, but every time I use it, I've got to like, is this a month yet? Is it 2 months? So I kind of need the same thing that RJ has, right? With his sitting and not sitting tracker. And then there's other things, right? Like it would be cool. I've got other things that, you're supposed to do it every month, or you're supposed to do it every 6 weeks, or you're supposed to do it every 4 weeks, or whatever. And I wished to myself just today, I wish there was a thing, an app where I could say, hey, I just changed it, and I don't want to figure out when, to set a timer in 3 months. I just want to know, like, I'll check it every week or so. I want to know how long it's been since the last time I changed it, right? So I'm like, oh, this could be one of these little apps that you build. So that's my little app. I want a little app that keeps track of a few different things, and I can say I reset the timer now for my bioelectric toothbrush, or for the cleaning solution that I have to remake every 3 weeks or whatever, right? And then I can check it. I know that I wanted to use the local storage component in my browser, so that it will keep track of, it uses that like a database. Um, and then I can check it whenever I want. So that's mine. How about
And
anybody else?
that's a very typical one. I've been keeping track of things in a spreadsheet, and I would love to be able to make it an app to do it instead, because the spreadsheet's sort of like, it's too clunky. You know what I mean? If you can do it in an app that has a button and it has the right
Yeah.
display, and it's easy to use, and maybe you can even talk to it, or,
Yeah. So it's kind of funny. RJ and we drunk the Kool-Aid, it's like, guys, you could just literally use a spreadsheet for that. And it's like, oh, it's too hard. It's too clunky.
I
So
would put it right next to change furnace filter on my Google Calendar. And like, it seems very extra to me.
thanks, Vicky.
well, the thing, I'm sort of like Peter in the sense that he has a situation where it's like very variable, like maybe, his timer or whatever needs to be is set for certain situations, and it'll vary based on circumstances. Those kinds of things are sort of hard to be constantly managing in a Google reminder or in a calendar.
There's a thing to that with this particular toothbrush. I'm using my regular electric toothbrushes and this toothbrush because it's extra, right? So there is a thing where it's like, I think I could stretch it to 4 months, or I've been using it really good, so I think I should change it every 2 months because I've been using it more than I think I have, right? Depending on which toothbrushes I'm using and stuff like that. So there is something to the variability of it that is kind of what I wanted.
Yeah, so that's where an app would be cool, like is after
Yeah.
you used it, you just press the little button on the app and then it keeps track of it. And that's something that's not easy to do in a calendar or in a Google reminder.
Yep.
So I posted something on in the AI salon, I think in the water cooler, that Chuck Hellebuck had made, and it was using circuits through Tinkercad, but you'd have to code it somehow. I can't remember how I did it. But it was talking about like goal. I can kind of like, when you're talking about like clicking things every time you use something, what he had was like a goal average, like for soccer. So every time someone kicked a goal, he would click it, and every time the goal went in, he would click a different button, so he could get like the average scoring, whatever, I don't know. But that's out there on the AI salon, I think, in the water cooler. It sounds very similar to what, clicking every time you use your toothbrush.
I like it, Vicky, and it makes me want the LLM to 3D print thing or something like that, or Circuitifier or whatever.
Yeah, he printed the case, but the circuit was created in, I guess Tinkercad does circuits now. I don't know.
And yeah, exactly, Scott. I need a robot. There are, yeah. Yeah, one of my electric toothbrushes has a little NFC chip in the brush head, and the brush and the brush the bottom, the base and the brush head talk to each other. The weirdest application of NFC chips that I can think of.
I love
And it
that.
literally goes in your mouth. It's weird,
I have one in my car that, like, so when I go and visit, my kids live an hour away, and they always say, text me when you get home. So I have an NFC in my car, and I just wave my phone over it and it texts them for me.
That's brilliant. I need more of those.
What is an NFC, you said?
It's a little piece of electronics that a phone can read or a toothbrush base can read. It's a tiny little chip that's got some ID in it that, you can read it. So one of the things you can do is put a little NFC sticker and then swipe your phone on it, and your phone goes, oh, she just read, this particular thing, and I know what to do when she does that.
Okay, thanks.
And in my case, I've got different brush heads I can use, so it knows which program to switch to, and then it also knows how to count. He's using this brush head again, this particular brush head.
So RJ, you can use them as a digital business card too. So if you put your like what your details you would have on a business card on the chip, and then someone else just, swipes your chip with their phone, and they have your business card
Oh,
details.
okay.
We've
Near
talked about
field
using them
communication.
on products in stores. So each product would have a particular, like a serial number. So anti-theft and checkouts and all that kind of stuff.
And is this an RF activated thing? Because I had a credit card that would do that. If I just put it
Yeah.
next to the card swiper, you didn't even have to, it was like one of these, you put it right next to it and somehow with RF, it would read
Yep.
the credit
Yep.
card chip. Yeah, okay.
Yep. That's NFC, near field communication.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Now I know what you're talking about. Well, I'm looking forward to making more apps. I'm just amazed at the one that I made today because I had this terrible problem sitting down too much. I just get too involved in what I'm
I like
doing on
it.
the
Yeah.
web.
That's really
So that
cool.
will help me, yeah. And then I had other ideas I was thinking about too, like, for other reminders or gratitude tracking or, action board, vision board, staying on track, reminding me of accomplishments, guided meditations, I want to gamify things as much as possible. Things that I'm trying to improve on or do better. I want to gamify it. So I
I,
thought of a lot of things that I could do.
I think I feel like a Gamify always like makes me shiver a little bit because people, um, companies, try to gamify things to drive consumer behavior, and it drives me nuts. But you're kind of not. It's not so much gamifying as much as like looking for ways to automate and simplify and things like that, or systematize something. Kind of like
Well,
Vicky does with her phone and getting
yeah,
home and
for
an
me,
NFC.
gamification actually works for me. Like in habit building, I've made a
You got
toothpick
streaks and
tracker, and I use that to track how much exercise I do, and that's actually been a very simple, easy way to do it. And with this um, app I just made showing how many minutes I've been sitting versus how many I've been moving, that's sort of gamification because when I look at it, I feel like I'm winning if I have a lot of movement icons show up, it's
yeah,
almost like on a game.
yeah, yeah. Uh, Virtuous gamifying. I like it.
Right.
Let me let's see. Let me do some cleanup. I opened a couple tabs or topics. We can kind of like close them. Um, uh, uh, RJ, I didn't want to steal your thunder, but you've kind of reinvented the HTML slideshows.
I ran
Um,
into that on the web. I just saw that today.
so
Reveal.
so let me put this. I'll put this in the chat, and then this is a small list of them. There's a few of them. Generally, they work with HTML, but there are a few that work with Markdown, and including Obsidian has a built-in very simple slideshow thing. In Obsidian, I won't demo it probably, uh, but you
Can
just
it narrate? Can it narrate also?
I
Voice.
don't think it can, and so it's so you've gone above and beyond. So you're doing something cool that it can't do. But with the Markdown ones, you actually just make one Markdown file like this, and then it plays it as a slideshow. So maybe you want to steal some of that, maybe you don't. I don't know. There are fewer of them. Well, anyway, these are some good ones, and then there's a list of a couple more. Um, uh, let's see. I kind of wanted to talk about. I guess let's think of what we should cover. I guess we're doing this again tomorrow, huh? Maybe not all of us, but I certainly am. Um, What should we cover in the next session or two? Continue to talk about coding, get back to Jenkifiers specifically, talk about Jenkifier 2.0, kind of the better Jenkifiers, and cleaning them up, local LLMs, play with Midjourney and Dolly more. Any preferences?
I have some curiosity around local LLMs.
Yeah.
I tend to be pretty connected, and I could see there being a value to having ones that are not connected, particularly if they're not used to train the AIs themselves. I'm mostly happy to train the AI. I think that it probably could use a little bit more of me and a little bit less of some people that are probably training the AI. But
still,
I can also see some use cases where it's not necessarily internet connected. That'd be great.
Thanks. A few more reasons to use local LLMs. One of them is that they're free because they're running on your machine. Another one is there's a whole bunch of them, different open source ones tuned for different things. So like there are definitely web coding specific ones, but probably I think I guess coding is an odd particular case. There's going to be a lot of coding models, but very specific models tuned for very specific things. There's a bunch of open source versions of those kinds of things. So it'd be good to have, the app store of a bunch of open source LLMs to choose from. Another reason to use local LLMs. Cool.
I would want to know, like, well, what can I mean, there's so many LLMs you could use, like ChatGPT or Claude or the other ones. So, like, what are some LLMs that you would really need to get as a local LLM, because otherwise you can't, they don't, only they do certain things that you want to do, and you sort of have no choice.
So, and your question, what you're wondering is what would those be, right? When would you have to choose a local one?
Right.
Yeah. I think so. So maybe I'll try to like steer us into exploring the local LLMs some, and the way to do it is to pick these managers, go through the managers, Jan, Jan. I'm gonna have to look up how to say that. LM Studio, GPT for all, and maybe Olama with some web API. So we look at a couple of these. I like LM Studio best, so we'll probably dig in on LM Studio unless somebody really wants to advocate for one of the other ones. And then, and then we'll learn how to use them better. And so then we can start answering questions. Why would I use, when would I use, which model, when would I use it? A lot of these, maybe local LLM is the wrong, short name for this. A different way to say this is model managers. So let's level up our game of model managers, and I think each of these will work with both local LLMs and web-based, API-based ones. And so some of these are open source models, and maybe you don't want to run them locally. Maybe you want to run it in the cloud because there's a bunch of services now that run open source models. A lot of those I think are, I don't know, maybe there's not a bunch, but I know of a few, and right now they're usually for free too. They're running like fancy models for free, just to kind of, because they're trying to figure out how the whole thing works. So maybe this is a good kind of like, I'll try to, let's de-emphasize coding in particular a little bit, and emphasize a little bit more playing with the model managers.
Is there a way to
And
try the models out first before you go through the trouble of having to load it and things like that, or?
well, trying them out is, you do have to. So here's Phi, the current cool little one from Microsoft. So it's not hard to try, but it is, downloading a 1.6 gigs. Usually you can go to Hugging Face and try it in the Hugging Face playground, or whatever other plugin, or sorry, playground to play with. So I guess that's two answers, RJ, kind of. One of them, yes, you can usually go to Hugging Face and try it in their playground. I'm not even sure why you would necessarily, if you can just download it on your machine, but sometimes you would, I guess. Makes sense. So we'll do both of those. We'll play with it before downloading it. We'll download it, we'll play with it. Different ones, right?
I'm trying to imagine why I would want to load a model, but I can't really think of a reason yet. At first I was thinking, well, maybe RAG, having that RAG capability, retrieval augmented generation capability might make it worth it. But, or maybe I thought having that Whisper, because you use Whisper, right?
I do, yeah.
I thought that might be cool because, lots of times I want to have it transcribe things that I don't want a cloud app to know about,
Yeah. Yeah, I use Mac Whisper. I guess maybe I haven't. I was gonna say, I think I've written something that sends text off to Whisper, or sorry, audio off to Whisper. There's another, the same guy who makes Mac Whisper. Isn't that weird? There's OpenAI also has a thing that does text to speech, and it does it really, really well. So it's a sibling of Whisper. Let me see if, I could go to my Gumroad. Yeah, I don't know if that works. Let's do this way. The same guy who wrote Mac Whisper has a new app called Voices, and it does speech synthesis, and it's really high quality. It really sounds really good. There's a weird little thing right now. It only does up to, I don't know, 16K tokens at a time, or something weird like that. So of course, oops, wrong one. Splitter here is a Python thing that I got ChatGPT to write, that takes a longer file and cuts it up into smaller text files, so I can give it to Voices.
Is there like a really popular local LLM that seems like people at entry level like us would be they're most interested in, everybody, all the entry level people that have local models say, oh yes, that's the one to get because it's useful for beginners?
It's kind of the ones that are the top on this app store, So Llama's popular. Stable Code, I think, is from Stability. I'm surprised. I guess Llama 2. Llama 2 was one of the go-tos. Now Llama 3. Claude, I think. does Anthropic have an open source one, or am I confusing them with somebody else? Anyway, these, the ones that they sort to the top here, these are the ones that you'd want to look at. Mistral, actually, Mistral and Mixtral. So, and an example of, so RJ, you had a good observation there. I don't know when we would use, a local model, or which model, why would we even bother like choosing different models? I think a good example, if I go back a couple sessions to where I was talking about story generators and stuff like that. I'm going to use this as an example of why you would use a particular model that's not, one of the generic models. And this is a good example of it. It's a kind of a trivial example, but somebody took the time and energy to take Llama 2 and turn it into something that writes stories and books and things like that. Maybe you want to do that, maybe you don't. But this is a good example of something where, there's a generic model and somebody said, I've got this particular need, like, I need it to write code, or I need it to specifically tell stories, develop great characters, or whatever, right? So they took they took the time and energy to fine tune it, and then you want to use the fine tune one, because it's going to be better at, something for you. So because we haven't played around with them too much, this group, this little team here isn't even good at knowing what we could do if we played around with the model manager, right?
Right.
But if we play around with the model manager, then we'll go, oh yeah, now I know why I would pick this one versus that one, and
And
this
I
one's
wonder,
easy.
is a decision process for this, should it consider maybe using a custom GPT first instead, and try that? And if the custom GPT couldn't handle it, then get a local model if they can find one that's been fine-tuned to do what they need?
Well, so one of the problems with OpenAI GPTs is that they're only available to ChatGPT Plus subscribers, right? So I don't know. I think the answer probably to that specific question is probably yes and. Sometimes you want to use a custom GPT and incur the overhead of that. If you want to write stories, I guess the other thing is how much does it cost and how flexible is it? One of the problems I've got with custom GPTs or the OpenAI GPTs, I can tell it's always GPT-4, right? It doesn't, like, no matter how much instruction you kind of wrap around it, at some point you can still tell it underneath it's GPT-4, which is great for almost like everything general, but anything's like specific. I can tell kind of, I get into ruts now with Midjourney prompts from GPT-4. It's got kind of, when I tell it to be creative, it's only got so many ways it's creative, and I've run out of that. So I can totally imagine the storytelling, somebody who spent some time, it's kind of like, when would you use Midjourney and when would you use Stable Diffusion? It's kind of, you want to use both, but there's things that you can do with Stable Diffusion you can't quite do with Midjourney, and there's things that, and vice versa. So I wouldn't limit it to one or the other. It's kind of both. We'll see you, Scott. I should wrap up and get off to dinner anyway. We had a long, kind of productive and kind of unproductive session. I hope that was okay. Thanks for your time and your patience, and we'll see you again.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care, all.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.